right, Luke 24. We'll see a few other passages tonight as well, but Luke 24 is where we'll begin. And we're in a series on heaven. And this is the 6th episode of our series on heaven. And last time we dealt with reigning in heaven. Our subject this evening is nature in heaven. Nature in heaven. And our focus has been on the eternal heaven. Not so much on the present heaven, where perhaps loved ones of ours are right now, because that one's temporary. There's gonna be new heavens. For us, future, part of our heaven experience will be the millennial reign on this earth. So we do have that to look forward to, but that's not our forever. Even that's temporary. Those 1,000 years will expire, and then we look forward to the eternal heavens. That's our true destiny. That is permanent. That is forever. And anything else is truly just a little blip on the radar screen of time compared with the eternal heaven. 1,000 years past that before you know it. And so really that merits our attention to familiarize ourselves with really where our permanent long-term destiny will be. There are some matters that are speculated over on this topic. There's discussion and speculation. What can we expect? What will be there? What will not be there? What things will be present in the eternal heaven? And what things might be absent in the eternal heaven? And so that's what we're going to look at tonight. Some of these kind of main entities. Will they be with us forever, or will they be gone forever? And by main entities, I mean, from a philosophical standpoint, space and time. From a celestial standpoint, sun, moon, stars, light, darkness. And from a maybe geological or even ecological standpoint, bodies of water, weather, seasons. And so we're going to look at those things this evening. I don't have a neat little division of 3 points like I normally do. We just really have these 7 main entities that we're going to look through. So bear with me along that line. But let me reiterate how we began this study, because it's important. We began the study by firmly establishing that it is the whole creation. The whole creation that groans, waiting for its redemption. It's all of it. It's the whole creation, according to Romans chapter 8. That means everything that God created and pronounced good will be redeemed, glorified, renewed, drastically improved. Everything. Several times as well, I've alluded to the principle of continuity. The principle of continuity in that you and I will be sinless and in glorified bodies, but we'll still be us. We'll still be uniquely us. I'll be Drew still. You'll be Gary still. That's the principle of continuity, and nature follows that pattern. All of creation follows that pattern. The reason why that's so important is because, and the reason we began with that, is because those are the underlying principles that are going to inform our understanding of Revelation 21 and 22. It's important that we keep those 2 principles in mind because that's where we see that Revelation 21 and 22 fulfill and restore what was lost in Genesis 3 from Genesis 1 and 2. And we've kind of shown that connection in this study, but we're going to continue to see that. We really need Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 to fully absorb Revelation 21 and 22 so that we know what to expect. Because all of Genesis 1 and 2 get redeemed and restored. Another reason why that's important is because there are some verses in Revelation 21 and 22 that will trip us up just a little bit if we zero in on just those verses and forget the bigger picture of all of the whole universe being redeemed according to Romans 8. And so we need the whole picture and those underlying principles if we're going to understand and have some clarity on some sort of tricky verses in Revelation 21 and 22. We'll look at those this evening. When I first began looking into what we'll see tonight, I've got to tell you, I was pleasantly surprised. A couple of years ago, I really started studying some of this stuff, and I was so refreshed to find that I think most Christians, in some ways, maybe even subconsciously, we've been a little bit misled by theologians, by commentators, by hymn writers, and they've led us perhaps unintentionally, to kind of misunderstand some things about heaven, and that misunderstanding has diminished our anticipation for heaven. And so it's so refreshing to correct and to clarify some of those incorrect assumptions that have been so widely embraced by some influential people. So we'll look into some of those things. The first one to cover tonight is space. Space. Many theologians and commentators have suggested that, by the time we get to the eternal heaven, by the time we get to heaven, space will be no more. Space is gone. Time and space will be over forever. But let's look at Luke 24. Look at verse 39. This is Jesus' glorified body. He's risen from the grave. We've been told that we'll get a body that's fashioned like unto his glorious body, so that there will be similarities between what Jesus was like here and what we'll be like. Verse 39, behold, my hands and my feet, that it is I myself, principle of continuity, handle me and see, for a spirit hath not flesh and bone. So a glorified body has flesh and bones. He's not just a spirit. He's not just a ghost. Will be fashioned like unto that glorious body. And so actual flesh and bones occupy physical space. And so if Jesus in his glorified body occupied physical, actual, real physical space, then so will we. Our glorified bodies, too, will occupy actual physical space. In Eden, there was time, matter, and space. God, in an instant, created time, matter, and space. Time, space, and matter. In the beginning, that's time. God created the heavens, that's space, and the earth, that's matter. God spoke those things into existence, and they were there in Eden, uncursed. So those things are not a result of the curse. They're not a result of the fall. And the new earth will restore Eden. When the theologians tell us, well, there's going to be a time where time and space will cease to exist as we know it, they're committing the error that we began this study by debunking, that Greek philosophy influence, Plato, that, it's all just going to be non-physical, all spiritual, abstract, other dimensional, super dimensional, mystical, it's going to be ethereal. They get that from Greek philosophy. They get that from Plato. They don't get that from the Bible, because the Bible calls it substantial. The Bible says actual bones, actual flesh, physical space, substantial. So there will certainly be space. If the new heavens and the new earth, the eternal heaven, if it doesn't have space, if there isn't actual space to occupy, then how can it be called a place? Jesus said, I go to prepare a place for you. You have to have space to have a place. Otherwise, the word space is nonsense. Doesn't make any sense. If space and time were obliterated, if space and time were completely obliterated, then that would mean that we could be in 10,000 places simultaneously, doing 10,000 different things at the same time. That would make us God. We're not going to become God. We're not going to become infinite. Only the Creator has those attributes. If we could be in 10,000 different places doing 10,000 different things, then we would become infinite. And God's plan is not to make his creatures infinite. His plan is not to make us infinite. It's to make us finite beings who are far better than they were before. That's what he plans to do with us. We'll still be finite beings, just vastly improved finite beings. We've looked at it, and we'll maybe see it again in a moment, but in chapter 21 of the book of Revelation, we're learning about this new heaven, new earth, the new Jerusalem, the holy city, and there's gates. And there's people coming in and out of the gates. So that's ingress and egress. So what that tells us is if you're in, then you're not out. And if you're out, then you're not in. And so you can't be a super dimensional hologram that exists simultaneously in numerous places. If you could, then the whole bit about the gates would be nonsense. It wouldn't make any sense at all. It would just be a throwaway. Well, he doesn't really mean that. But no, he does mean that. Otherwise, the gate makes no sense. God made human beings to inhabit time and space. We were made for time and space, just like fish were made for water. Now, you wouldn't talk to a fish, or maybe you would, But if you did talk to a fish, you probably wouldn't try to attract them to a heaven where there's no swimming and no water and no gills and no fins. It's going to be great. You're going to love it. It's going to be nothing like anything you've ever known. It's going to be completely foreign, and it's going to be something that you weren't even made for. If the fish could talk and understand you, it would say no thank you. And I think time and space are the same way for human beings. Why would God give us an eternity that's so different from what he made us for? Human bodies and human lives were made to inhabit time and space. So that's space. But number two, time. Time. Look over at Revelation 10, and we'll spend the rest of our time in Revelation. When I got a hold of this, it made so much more sense to me. Revelation 10 says, "And the angel which I saw stand upon the sea and upon the earth lifted up his hand to heaven, and swear by him that liveth forever and ever, who created heaven, and the things that therein are, and the earth, and the things that therein are, and the sea, and the things which are therein, that there should be time no longer." Now, what normally happens is people stop reading right there, and they form a whole doctrine around it. We've got songs. Time is going to be no more. When the roll is called up yonder, the trumpet of the Lord shall sound, and time shall be no more. And hymn writers have embraced that. This is the only verse that they get it from. But it makes no sense whatsoever when you include the rest of the Bible. The rest of the Bible explains the Bible, and we need the rest of the Bible. You have to consider the context in which this verse is given. This is talking about a specific point during the tribulation. How long is the tribulation? 7 years. So why would God stop time forever in the middle of the tribulation? How could it be 7 years if time stops in the middle of it? What follows the 7-year tribulation? A 1,000-year reign. How can a 1,000-year reign follow if time just stopped and ceased forever in the middle of the tribulation? It can't. We'll say, okay, well, maybe Revelation 10:6 is talking about the new heaven and the new earth that are described in chapter 21 and 22. No, it doesn't say anything about that. There's no indication that Revelation 10:6 is referring to chapters 21 or 22. It's not there. And so what is in the next verse is the question that we have to ask. Verse 7. "But in the days of the voice of the seventh angel, after the sixth, previously referred to, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished, as he hath declared to his servants, the prophets." It's saying there's another judgment coming after verse 6 during the tribulation. So verse 6 is simply saying there's no time left until God's next judgment occurs. It's just talking about the next one. And that makes way more sense out of the numerous references to time that occur in the Bible after Revelation 10:6, because there are a great many of them. And so if time just happens to stop forever in Revelation 10:6, why does God keep talking about time measurements afterward? For instance, we know that in the present heaven, there are martyrs who lost their lives on this earth, and they ask God, how long till we be avenged? How long is a question of time. Later on in the present heaven, we find that we're told that the saints, the children of God, serve him day and night. Day and night is a measurement of time. A little bit later on, we find that we're actually told that there was silence in heaven about the space of a half an hour. That's a measurement of time. So it would make no sense for time to completely just stop in the middle of the tribulation in chapter 10, verse 6, when there's all these other references to time. There's even music and singing in heaven. I don't know a whole lot about formal music myself, but I know that the hymns are classified into 3/4 time and 4/4 time and tempo. And if you've ever learned an instrument, there's time that's a part of music. And so nowhere in chapter 21 or chapter 22 are we told that time gets eliminated. In fact, time is most certainly not a result of the curse. The curse is taken away, and the results of the fall into sin and the curse of sin, those are all gone in the new heaven and the new earth. But what about the things that existed prior to it? Time existed in Genesis chapter 1. The evening and the morning were the first day, literal 24-hour days. And what did God call them? Good. All the things that God made in Genesis 1 and 2, he pronounced good. There is another passage that's occasionally cited by those who would say that time will be kaput, no more. they'll point out that 2 Peter tells us that one day with the Lord, you remember that verse? One day with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. That's true of the Lord, because the Lord exists outside of space and time. He designed and implemented and created space and time because he is from everlasting. He has no age. So it's true of him, but not true of us. We don't become God. We become a whole lot better than we are now, but we do not become God in heaven. If there was no more time, then we would know the future. If time ceased to exist, we would know the past and the future. We'd be all-knowing. We'd be infinitely omniscient. But that's an attribute of God, not an attribute of man, even redeemed man. We would know what would happen. Time will go on forever, but it will be forever good. How about that? Time will go on forever, but it will be forever good. It will not be the limitation that it is now. Right now, the passage of time limits opportunities. But then time will only increase opportunities. Rather than time bring a loss like it does now, time will only bring gain forever and ever. What a beautiful thought that is. It'll never run out. God will continue to provide it. That's remarkable. So that's time. And then number 3, bodies of water. Bodies of water. Look at chapter 21. Revelation 21. And verse 1 it says, "And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea." Oh no! There are people that go, "But I love water. I don't want to go to that heaven if there's no more sea. I like to swim and surf and snorkel and boat and go to the beach, and I love all of the sea creatures. I don't want to go to a heaven that doesn't have any sea. It doesn't have any bodies of water. I won't get to ride any jet skis. No, I want to stay here. I don't want to go to any heaven." But what we need to understand is a few things here about this, is that in Bible times, the sea often meant, and I'm not saying that it's only figurative here, but the sea was synonymous with danger, with tempestuous storms, Acts 27, with shipwreck, fragile ships, and watery graves. The sea was this place you go and might never return. It wasn't like you hopped on an airplane with a return flight that you were pretty sure would get you right back home. If you got on a ship into the Mediterranean, unless you were a Sidonian, unless you were a Phoenician that really knew what you were doing, you might not come back. And so they thought of the sea as such a fearful thing. And so that's primarily what is going to be no more here. But it does say sea. But it's important that we understand that just because there may be no more seas doesn't mean there won't be bodies of water. We know for sure, it can't possibly mean there won't be bodies of water on the new heaven and the new earth, because there's a giant river that flows right through the capital city that we're told about in chapter 22 in verses 1 and 2. Rivers can be gigantic. So those who love playing with water and all the water things, there's going to be think about some of the rivers that we have even on this cursed earth. The Amazon River is, but rivers are just skinny and long. They're not like the ocean. The Amazon is 7 miles wide. The Nile, the Nile is 2 miles wide. So these are giant bodies of water. And so if we know for sure, because God tells us that there is a river in the New Jerusalem, the holy city, and it flows through the capital, then why would we assume that it's tiny and insignificant? It very likely could be that it's a fresh water replacement for oceans and seas. Lakes tend to empty, rivers tend to flow down into lakes. We're not told anywhere that there won't be a lake. Could be a beautiful lake. It could do all those things that you love doing in and around the water. Plus, why would God wipe out all the sea creatures? Why would he do that? Sea creatures, just like all of the animals of the world, bring praise to our hearts for God as we marvel at their creator. We were over in Seaside the past couple of years. You could go to the aquarium, and these little, what are they, otters? Is that what they are? So what are they, sea lions? Whatever they are, they're hilarious. I mean, they just have so much personality. They out-compete each other to get treats, and they're like doing comedy routines, and they're just amazing creatures. Why do so many people want to? They make cable TV shows. Hey, check out the company that installs all the aquariums for rich people. And, How many different colors of fish are there? Can you count them? It's amazing to sit back and behold all of the stripes and millions of different variations just of fish. Last summer, we were in Georgia for a wedding, and the Georgia Aquarium is one of the more celebrated, larger aquariums, and we saw a dolphin show. It blew my mind. Dolphins. God made and formed and designed dolphins. What powerful, gracious, and intelligent creatures they are. The things that a human being can train an animal 10 times bigger to do, swim in our eyes just blows your mind. And if you're a believer and you have God in you, not only does it blow your mind, it fills your heart with awe and worship of Almighty God for displaying himself by giving us this creature at which we can marvel. Wouldn't you hate to be an atheist and have nobody to praise for it? Wow, what a great animal. Thank you, nobody. How deflating that would be. Could it be that our glorified bodies will have a greatly improved lung capacity? And maybe we'll be able to dive deep down and observe some of those sea creatures without a tank, without an oxygen tank. Maybe we'll be able to hold our breath for longer. Point is, God is not going to just annihilate all of those things because there's no more seas. God is going to enhance all of those things and put them in rivers and lakes instead. That's all. And we may get a good look at them. So that's number 3, bodies of water. Number 4, seasons. Seasons. Look at verse 4, chapter 21, verse 4. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death. Some say, okay, that's good that there's no more death, but I love and seasons mean death. They say, well, in spring and summer, the foliage and the plants and the trees, they blossom and show forth life, but in the fall and winter, they die. And there's no more death. So that means there's going to be no more seasons, because you have to have the seasons are tied to that cyclical nature of life and death. And they'll say, well, when was those things implemented? It was after the fall. So under the curse. When Noah gets off the boat in Genesis chapter 8, that's when we're told that there's going to be seed time and harvest, winter and summer, cold and heat. And so those sound like pretty good reasons. You go, man, that's a little disappointing, because I love seasons changing. The older I get, the more impressed I am with just observing the way that God caused the transition and the change and the variety. Would he really wipe all that out and just stop doing it? I say not. I say not, because yes, it is correct that we find out about seed time and harvest, heat and winter, cold and summer, heat and winter in Genesis 8. But Genesis 1:14 says that the things that God had created already up to that point would be for signs and for seasons, even before death. Death didn't enter till Genesis 3, but in Genesis 1, God says there's seasons. So God somehow made a way for things to change in an observable, cyclical, noticeable way, changes that provide for variety and new things, even without death. I don't know how God did that, but I know that if he did it then, he can do it in the future. He can do the same thing on the new heaven and the new earth. It's going to be exciting. The fact that there's no more death won't inhibit the beauty of nature. It will magnify the beauty of nature. I mean, how can you read it and go, oh, well, that's unfortunate. I sure am going to miss that. No, the things that he pronounced good, he's not going to just inhibit and stifle. He's going to magnify. He's going to bring even more out of it. The beauty that we observe in the changing of the seasons now, it'll be a better version of it, whether there's death or not. He'll do that. It will be a source of pleasure and never destruction. If the changing of seasons fills us with praise and worship now, it'll be more so then, not less. And then number 5, the luminary bodies. The luminary bodies, look at chapter 21, look at verse 23. Chapter 21, verse 23. And the city had no need of the sun, neither to shine in it. For the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. Chapter 20. There will be no night there, and they need no candle, neither light of the sun. Some people look at that and categorically state, well, there's going to be no sun. There will be no sun and no moon. It'll be gone forever. But it doesn't say that. What it says is that they won't be needed. It doesn't say they'll be absent. It just says that they won't be needed. God didn't need them in Genesis 1. Remember, God himself was the light for several days before he actually created the sun, moon, and stars. He didn't need Genesis 1, but he did because he wanted to. He did to show what he can do. If the sun and the moon and the stars were to not exist at all in heaven, then wouldn't you have to really wonder what Romans 8 means when it says that the whole creation awaits redemption? Why aren't the sun, moon, and stars included? So certainly, all we're told here is that they won't be needed. It doesn't say that they won't exist. In fact, Psalm 148, let's turn there, verses 3 through 6. Those verses praise the Lord for the sun, moon, and stars, and they say that they'll be established forever and ever. Forever and ever. So if Psalm 148, 3 to 6 is true, and Revelation 21, 24, and 22, 5 are also true, then I think we can glean that they'll exist and be redeemed and glorified and renewed because they're parts of creation according to Romans 8. They'll last forever according to Psalm 148. There just won't be necessarily a need for them in Revelation 21 and 22. Well, but why would God I can't believe that God would do something that's unnecessary. Why would God do something if it isn't necessary and won't even be used? Because heaven is not about necessity or survival. Heaven is about marveling, being about amazement. Heaven is about worship and marveling at what God is able to do. It's not about survival or necessity at all. The point is simply that we won't be dependent on those luminary bodies. You think of, if you're reading a book in the middle of the day and the sun is shining bright into your living room, you really don't need your lamp. But if God wants to give you a lamp, he still can. And that's kind of the idea, is that the sun and moon and stars won't be eliminated. They'll just be outdone, outshone. God will shine brighter. Plus, can you imagine no sunsets? How could there be no sunsets? If there's literally no sun, then there's no sun to watch set. And as we've seen so far, God does not subtract the things that glorify him. God multiplies the things that glorify him. Let's say, hypothetically, that I'm completely wrong, and those verses in chapter 21 and 22 mean that there will be no sun and no moon and no stars, despite what Romans 8 and Psalm 148 say, around the new earth and the new heaven. Don't you think that because it is the whole universe that will be redeemed, that God would still create in the new heavens cosmos in such a way that there will at least be a comparable replacement for a sunset? How could he just dispense with it altogether? It shouts that he's there. It shouts his order. There's no way he just, I don't need that anymore. I don't want that anymore. No, I can't imagine that would be the case. And then darkness. Number 6, darkness. Chapter 21, verse 25. And the gates of it shall not be shut at all by day, for there shall be no night there. 22:5 as well. There shall be no night there. Okay, so what we night. And at night, it's dark. So does that mean, because we're told pretty adamantly here that there's no night, does that mean there will be no darkness? No darkness at all? I don't. In chapter 21, where we're told there's no night there, in chapter 21, where we're told there's no night there, that's also in the same verse about the gates. And so the comment there about no night has to do with the gates. Remember, in Bible times, they made sure that those gates of were closed at night, because night was where lurked the criminals and the bad guys and the wickedness and the evil that were trying to escape detection in light. And so the bad things were all out there at night. And so they made sure they closed the gates of the city. And this here says, hey, these gates of heaven don't ever close, because there is no evil. There are no criminals. There is no wickedness. That's all gone. And so we have to understand that that's what that has to do with. And yet darkness itself, the Bible over and over again compares evil to darkness, but we're never told that darkness itself is evil. Darkness, again, is not a result of the curse. There was darkness in Genesis 1 before there ever was sin. Darkness can be good in some ways. Family time, home time, sun has set, it's more relaxing, isn't it? You sit back and when you put a fire in the fireplace, it has a lot more coziness to it when it's dark out. How about camping? When you pillow your head outside in the summer, you look up into the great expanse and the grandeur that shows the handiwork of a living God who planned it and fashioned it. That is a time where you just are bursting with praise for God. And so if there's no darkness, how would you be able to see those stars that God promised in Psalm 148 would be established forever and ever? He will make, so even if there's no, certainly there is no light there, but let me offer just a possibility here. It doesn't mean that there will be no light anywhere in the universe. This is specifically talking about the new heaven, perhaps just the New Jerusalem, the holy city. Could it be that light is a constant in the capital city? But when you get out into the other parts of the new earth, you get out into the country of the new earth, could it be that light isn't a constant there? Or could it be that perhaps we'll be able to travel to some other planets in glorified bodies with glorified minds? Will God make a place somewhere in the universe from which we will be able to see his stars? Why have stars otherwise? I would think so. I don't know how he'll do it, but I firmly believe that he will do that. We'll get to see them from somewhere. If God's artistic genius is going to be on full display, then the beauty of twilight won't be lost forever. It will somehow be redeemed forever. Twilight is beautiful. How could that just be gone? He'll get it in there somewhere. It's dazzling. And then lastly, number 7, weather. Weather. We have preferences on weather. There might be some kinds of weather that you would say, no, that doesn't glorify God. I don't like that at all. But God says in Job 37 and 38, remember Job got mouthy with God? He let him have it. He asked like 80 some rhetorical questions. Have you? No, well, I have. And among those questions are, have you sent lightning and rain and hail and snow? Oh, no, well, I have. And what God is saying is that I have sent these different weather patterns on this earth to show myself to the occupants of this earth. So if he showed himself on this earth that way, and this earth, principle of continuity, is a prototype for the new earth, then why wouldn't he show his power on the new earth with weather patterns? Snow, hail, rain, lightning. You hear that and you go, hold on. I live in the Seattle area here, and you may say, well, but I don't want to be cold and damp and uncomfortable. That doesn't sound like heaven to me. But what I'm saying is that God is not going to baby-proof the new earth for us and make it safe by the current fallen standards, whether we're talking about weather or anything else. We're not just a bunch of little babies and God packs everything up so that we don't get hurt. Rather, he enables these bodies to not only withstand, but also to cherish the full range of capabilities of all of the elements, such that it will not kill us, it will not hurt us, and it will not even displease us. He'll make us tough for the elements, not remove the elements for our weakness. And so what are some possibilities that there may be? Could we maybe go hiking up in the Arctic in the snow with no possibility of freezing to death or having pain from cold? Yeah, I think that's a distinct possibility. Could you maybe jump 300 feet off a cliff into a beautiful crystal river without the possibility of hitting your head or getting hurt or dying or drowning? Yeah, I think you'll have a body that'll be able to do those kind of things. Lightning. Will you be able to walk through a field that God is pummeling with lightning bolts and glory in it and just absorb the electricity of the power of God and be exhilarated by it rather than fearful of it? Yeah, absolutely. That's a possibility. So now what will those bodies be able to do beyond that? Come back next week. We'll talk a little bit more about what our bodies, the nature of our bodies next week. Then we'll talk about the nature of our minds. Still have a couple other fun family and society loved ones. We'll talk about all those things. So we're looking forward to learning more about heaven. Heavenly Father, when we read about these things, we are just enamored with your goodness. Lord, we are not worthy of all of these things. Lord, we are only worthy of perdition and suffering. But Father, you have so much planned for us. Lord, forgive us for withholding any praise from you for it. And Lord, may we just be more, Lord, but to fulfill our purpose while we're here to point others to you. In Jesus' precious name, amen. We are adjourned. We'll catch you on Sunday.
Lightning in a bottle.
Do you have a title at all?
Nature in heaven. Nature in heaven. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
It was a little bit less organized than I normally am.
No, it was good. I just missed that.